The Big Ten championships were this past weekend, and they were absolutely bonkers. I mean, absolutely nuts. From upsets and in so many different weight classes, and not even just the championships, but from early rounds, from you're talking early as first round to the quarterfinals, to the semis, so many crazy things that happen. So I'm going to go weight by weight, give you some of the crazy things that happened, as well as some of the championship recap. If you missed it, if you weren't able to watch it, or if you just want a reminder as what happened. So first of all, these are your Big Ten champions right here. Every single Big Ten champion, starting off at 125 with Spencer Lee. Spencer Lee absolutely dominated his way through this tournament this year, and this was actually his first ever Big Ten title, which is pretty insane to think about, that this is Spencer Lee, two-time national champion, but this is his first Big Ten title. It just shows the depth of this tournament. It's the toughest conference in the entire country, and it's because of that depth. Now, this year, Spencer Lee actually, he completely obliterated his way through the bracket, winning by fall, tech fall, and then major decision in the finals, beating Schroeder in the finals 16-2, almost a tech fall. But Schroeder did have an impressive tournament. He beat D'Agostino in the semifinals by a decision, but just something that I wanted to mention there. It was an impressive tournament for him in Spencer Lee, and it'll be interesting to see how he does, like how all these guys do going into the national tournament next week. So with that being said, let's move into the next weight at 133 pounds. And there's so much to unpack in this weight, let's be honest. From Sebastian Rivera to Roman Bravo Young, Seth Gross, and Austin DeSanto. What exactly happened here? Going on into the semifinals first are some of the matches you want to look at. You want to look at Sebastian Rivera versus Seth Gross. And this was a rematch from the Midland semifinals whenever Seth Gross actually beat Sebastian Rivera. But Seabass turned things around this time, beat Seth Gross by a score of 7-6, an impressive victory, moving on to the finals where he would face Roman Bravo Young, who just beat Austin DeSanto. Now, Austin DeSanto and actually Roman Bravo Young both kind of just squeaked out some wins in the quarterfinals. Austin DeSanto of Iowa defeating Ridge Lovett of Nebraska in the quarters, whereas Roman Bravo Young defeated Sammy Alvarez in the quarters of Rutgers. It was one of, if you have not seen that match in the quarterfinals, the last 30 seconds of that match was some of the most insane wrestling and insane scramble I've ever seen. Roman Bravo Young was running around the mat, doing flips, doing roll throughs, and just trying to avoid getting taken down. Not that it really mattered because he was up by 3 points anyway, but that was the quarters. Then we move on to the semis. Austin DeSanto and Roman Bravo Young gave us a match. It was a 3-2 decision. Roman Bravo Young wasn't able to lock up that cradle like he did in the duel, but it was still an impressive victory. Then we move on to the finals with Sebastian Rivera and Roman Bravo Young. And although Roman Bravo Young did have a solid match against Rivera, he just wasn't able to quite get the points that he needed against him. And Sebastian Rivera won 7-2 in the finals, making him a two-time Big Ten champ, of course, beating Spencer Lee last year and Roman Bravo Young this year. This is a weight where I can see anything happening at the national tournament. Don't be surprised if you see another order with all these different guys and going on into the national tournament at 141. And yes, there was a lot of time I spent talking at 133, but that's because that was the most insane weight of the weekend. But 141 was also an impressive weight. One of the biggest things that happened here, of course, Luke Pletcher won the bracket at 141 pounds, beating Nick Lee in the finals by a score of 6-5. He was able to turn the tide from the dual meet whenever Lee, to be honest, just kind of dominated Luke Pletcher in the duel. But, of course, Luke Pletcher went back in the room, fixed those mistakes, fixed those errors that he needed to work on, was a bit more defensive and offensive was, I think, the biggest thing. It was able to beat Nick Lee 6-5. The other big thing of this weight was Max Murin actually losing and not making it to the semifinals. He lost to Mitch McKee and Chad Redd. Now, he was able to later avenge that loss against Mitch McKee when he was going for 5th and 6th. However, Chad Redd is a guy that just looked solid this tournament, looked really, really good. He had a solid match against Nick Lee in the semis, but ultimately wasn't able to get the job done. And Nebraska is a team that Chad Redd of Nebraska helped Nebraska have a solid Big Ten tournament, finishing in second place overall. And we'll get the team scores in just a bit. But that's what happened at 141. So what happened at 149 pounds? Well, at 149 pounds, you had Pat Lugo defeating Sammy Sasso by a score of 2-1. Another close match, just like their duel was, that went into overtime. Now, Lugo had an impressive tournament. He was a bit more offensive than Sammy Sasso, just like he was in the duel. That's just kind of the type of wrestlers that they are. Sammy Sasso a bit more defensive, but he beat him by a score of 2-1. Now, talking about some of the earlier matchups too, Brayton Lee is a guy that people have been looking out for in this bracket. Brayton Lee of Minnesota. Pat Lugo was able to beat him by a score of 4-1. Another thing that happened in this bracket, you look at a Jared Verclaren. Some people are wondering, what happened with Penn State? What's going on here? Jared Verclaren didn't have the best tournament. He's a guy who I believe was in contention to do really well at the Big Ten. He was really coming into his own, peaking at this point in the season, but just didn't quite have the Big Ten tournament everybody expected him to have. He was beat in an early round by Yaya Thomas of Northwestern, defeated him. Ended up placing above him, I believe it was in the end. However, Verclaren just wasn't able to pull out anything crazy. A guy who had a very impressive tournament as well was Colin Puritan of Nebraska, who beat Kanan Storr in the Conci semis and then beat Brayton Lee to give him a high placing in the Big Ten bracket at 149 pounds. Now, moving on to 157 pounds. What was the deal at 157? This was really Ryan Deacon's weight. Deacon of Northwestern, absolutely, he crushed his way through the bracket. He's been a clear favorite ever since the Cliff Keen Las Vegas tournament earlier in the season. But Ryan Deacon ended up beating Kendall Coleman in the finals by a score of 7-2, a very sound victory. Going up to that point, other things in the bracket to discuss. I don't think... I think Deacon's going to be a big threat at Nationals, but the one thing that I wanted to talk about at 157 was Caleb Young of Iowa losing out, going 0-2, not even placing, not even having, he just did not have a good tournament at Big Tens. You want to talk about Jared Verclaren at the weight before, well, Caleb Young for Iowa at this weight just didn't quite have the tournament everybody expected him to have, coming in as one of the top seeds. First of all, losing to Peyton Robb of Nebraska. Like I said, Nebraska just had an impressive team tournament, and him defeating Caleb Young was just one part of that. The other thing now is Robb beat Barone. Barone was another guy who beat Caleb Young, and then Peyton Robb ended up beating Barone for third and fourth, ended up beating him later on in the tournament and had just an impressive run. Going on to 165 pounds, the two big guys here, let's be honest, are Vincenzo and Marinelli. The third guy I want to mention is Evan Wick. Evan Wick actually medical forfeited out of the tournament and after the first match, and so he medical forfeited. He will end up getting a qualifying spot at Nationals, but just medical forfeited out of the tournament, kind of questioning, how I'm just wondering how hurt he is and hope he's doing all right so we see him do well at Nationals. The other guy here, Isaiah White of Nebraska, of course, having another, an impressive run for the team. But Vincenzo and Marinelli, oh my gosh, what a match. That had to be one of my favorite matches to watch just because of these two. Just going upper body with each other, over and under hooks, and just really, just throwing each other around, rolling with each other on the mat, just going all the way around the mat. And these over and unders, throwing each other, and ended up not getting any of those throws, which was the crazy part. No points scored off of those throws. It ended up being Alyx Marinelli's single that won the match for him in the last 10 seconds, probably 10, 15 seconds of the match, which was bonkers to see Marinelli and Vincenzo. That ended up by a score of 3-2 was the final score of that match. Absolutely insane. Then we move on to 174 pounds. 174 was Mark Hall and Michael Kemmer. And if I think I just failed to mention, Alyx Marinelli was the one who beat Vincenzo in that last match, making him a Big Ten champion. And Vincenzo he will never win a Big Ten title, which is unfortunate for him, but he still has a chance at a national title. Now, moving on to 174 in Mark Hall and Michael Kemmer. This score was another match that was reversed, another upset, if you want to call it, based on rankings, based on seeds. Mark Hall beat Michael Kemmerer this time by a score of 8-5. Beat him by a score of 8-5. And I will say that Michael Kemmerer, for the most part, had a little bit more impressive of a tournament. Kemmerer up to the finals, he had a fall, a major Skatska, and then, while on the other side, Hall, well, he wrestled well in the early rounds with a tech fall over Gunther, and then he had a 5-4 decision over Dylan Liddy of Purdue. That was, it was a close match, and this is a match, you see these guys wrestle so many times throughout the year that, a lot of these guys are going to be closing that gap, and this was kind of a case of that with Dylan Liddy and Mark Hall. But Mark Hall, on the other hand, completely turned the tide against Michael Kemmerer, was dominating him for the most part in the first 2 periods. Then in the third period, you see Kemmerer start coming back. Mark Hall wasn't looking quite the wrestler that he was in the third period, and Kemmerer took advantage of that and ended up coming back. I believe Hall was up like 7-1, 7-2 going into the third period, just was not able to hold on to that lead, making this a match to look forward to at the national tournament. This is a match I'm 100% looking forward to watching. Now you want to talk about another impressive Penn State wrestler. That's at 184 pounds, looking at Aaron Brooks, who had a standout tournament. One of my favorite tournaments, or favorite guys to watch in this tournament, just because I wasn't sure how he was going to do. Now, he was the number 1 seed at this tournament, and the Big Ten actually isn't necessarily the way to talk about when it comes to 184 pounds. It wasn't the strongest bracket. You have some solid guys in the bracket, but not the strongest bracket at 184 compared to like the ACC at 184 pounds that has Hidley, Bolin, and Bonacorsi. However, all these Big Ten guys are going to be guys to look out for at 184 at the national tournament. Starting off with Aaron Brooks, who won by a score of 3-2 in the finals against Cam Caffey of Michigan State. Caffey, wow, he's had a standout year, kind of came out of nowhere from the beginning of the year up until this point, and he's just wrestled very impressively, made it to the finals. He beat Abe Assad in the semifinals, Assad of Iowa. Now, Caffey, the great thing about this weight, I think, especially here at 184, is that it's a very young weight. You look at Aaron Brooks, who's a true freshman. You look at Abe Assad, who is another freshman, and even a Rocky Jordan, who finished in 5th place, wasn't in the finals or anything, but 5th place finish for the freshman is impressive. Other guys to look out for here are Taylor Venz of Nebraska. Venz, okay, beat Aaron Brooks just about a month ago in the dual meet, but Aaron Brooks was able to turn that and pin Venz in the semifinals. Absolutely, stunned me. That I was blown away whenever I saw that. Whenever he pinned Venz, that was a match to watch. And then Venz did end up avenging that loss he had to Abe Assad from earlier in the year for the 3rd and 4th place match, and ended up taking 3rd. But this was an impressive weight for a couple of these guys. Then you look to another great weight, and another great guy at 197 in Colin Moore. Colin Moore just had a very sound weekend of wrestling. Defeating Eric Schultz of Nebraska, I believe the only guy of Nebraska, yes, in the finals was Eric Schultz. Colin Moore beat him by a score of 4-1. Up until that point, Colin Moore had a major decision, and then a decision in the finals. The other things going on at 197 are Shakur Ishida. Shakur Ishida is back at 197 now. A very solid weekend, defeating Jacob Warner in one of the early rounds, which stunned a lot of people, including myself, just because Shaq, with his injury, just didn't look to be the wrestler that he was in the past. But he wrestled very well this tournament, was actually offensive going into the semifinals whenever he did end up losing to Schultz in the semis by a score of 4-3, which I think that is a match that can be tossed up again. Now, unfortunately, Shakur Ishida did have to injury default out of the tournament once he got into the 3rd and 4th place match against Jacob Warner. Warner was beating him up until that point. However, Shaq kind of tweaked I believe it was his knee again, and ended up injury defaulting out of the tournament. But an impressive weekend for Colin Moore. And then you want to talk about heavyweight. Heavyweight, of course, at the last weight before I get into the team scores, is wow. A great way to end the night with Gable Steveson and Mason Paris. This ended with Gable Steveson winning by a score of 8-6 in the finals. Was a little bit more offensive, a little bit more aggressive than Mason Parris. However, the one thing I do want to say is that I believe it was the second period when Mason Parris was in deep on a shot on Gable, ended up taking him to his back, and I mean, he was stuck if the time wasn't out. Now, rewatching that a little bit, yes, Mason Parris did take him over. I think Gable Steveson may have known it was kind of towards the end of the period and kind of like let loose a little bit. But I'm just saying that it's completely capable that Mason Parris could beat Steveson. However, Gable Steveson was the aggressor in this match, in this tournament, was Gable Steveson. Now, up until this point, Steveson beat Cassiope again. He beat him by a score of 9-4 this time. Not quite the major decision before, but a 9-4 decision. And on the other side, Parris over Hilger by a score of 4-0 in the semifinals. Hilger and Cassiope both ended up wrestling again, where Cassiope beat Hilger. Cassiope, of course, of Iowa. Iowa's heavyweight. And then you look at Jensen, who's from Nebraska, took 5th. Gary Traub of Ohio State, 6th. And then the other guy I want to talk about here is Seth Nevels of Penn State, who injury defaulted out of the first match, ended up tweaking his leg, which was very unfortunate to see. And it's just not what you want to see, is guys actually getting hurt and being injured. And that's kind of what played into the detriment of Penn State taking 4th place. Is one, you want to talk about Jared Verclaren didn't necessarily have the tournament that he wanted to have. Then, well, Shakur actually had he overperformed this tournament. He did end up injury defaulting for 3rd and 4th. And then Seth Nevels not quite able to pull anything out because he injury defaulted out of both of his matches. Now, the one thing here, although Penn State did take 4th place with 107 points, they did have the most finalists, and I think they have the best finalist potential going into the NCAAs. Iowa now did have the most champions, although not the most finalists, most champions, with Spencer Lee, with Pat Lugo, Alyx Marinelli, all winning championships. And then Nebraska, Iowa won with 157.5 points. Nebraska took 2nd with 132 points. Like I said, they just had consistent guys. Ohio State taking 3rd with 112. Penn State in 4th with 107 points, and Purdue taking 5th, rounding out the top 5 with 83 points. This was an impressive weekend. It was one of my favorite tournaments to watch. Please let me know in the comments below what your favorite match was and how you think everybody's going to do at the national tournament.